There's a pair of boots sitting in a box under my bed that I haven't touched in 11 years. I know that's a strange way to start this, but I need you to understand that before I tell you what I saw that morning outside Windsor Castle, you need to know what it means when something a man owns outlasts everything he believed about himself. Because that's the only way this story makes any kind of sense. It was the third week of March, and England hadn't made up its mind yet about the season. The sky was that specific pale gray that tourists photograph, thinking it looks dramatic, but locals just call Tuesday. I'd driven down from Coventry the night before with my younger brother Declan, who had recently announced that his spiritual journey required him to visit every royal residence in southern England before his 35th birthday. He had 11 months and 6 properties left. I was doing him a favor by driving. That's what I told myself. We arrived at Windsor just before 8 in the morning. Declan wanted to be early. He had a printed itinerary. He had snacks in a Ziploc bag and a waterproof cover for his camera. I had a thermos of cold coffee from a petrol station forecourt and a general sense that I should have stayed home. Windsor in March before the crowds arrive is actually something. I'll give it that. The town sits quiet around the castle, like it's still deciding whether to wake up. The long walk stretches out ahead of you, and there's a mist that sits low over the grass, and for about 30 seconds when you first see it, you understand why people travel across the world to stand here. You feel it. Then Declan asks if you want a rice cake, and the moment passes. We parked near the town center and walked. The castle gates were visible from a distance, those tall iron things that look exactly like you imagine them to look, which is somehow both impressive and anticlimactic at once. A handful of other early visitors were already clustering near the entrance. A family with 2 kids who were immediately more interested in pigeons than in British history. An older couple sharing a map. 3 young women with matching rucksacks who I suspected were university students doing something for coursework. And then there were the guards. I noticed them the way you always notice them. First as decoration, which is the terrible, honest truth of how most people see them. Your eye registers the red tunic, the black bearskin, the absolute stillness, and then your brain files it under landmark rather than person, and you move on. That's just what happens. I'm not proud of it, but I think most of us do it without realizing. But I didn't move on. Not right away. Something made me stop. I'm going to tell you what it was, but I need to back up first. I need to tell you about the boots. My father worked at a shoe factory in the Midlands for 22 years. Not a glamorous job. Not a job he would have chosen if someone had handed him a list. He'd wanted to study engineering. Had the grades for it, apparently. But his father got sick in the autumn of the year my dad was supposed to start university, and that was that. He went to work instead. He went to work, and he kept going to work, and somewhere along the way the dream got packed away like a winter coat at the end of a season. He used to say, and I heard this so many times that it stopped meaning anything until it suddenly meant everything. He used to say, there's dignity in the doing, even when the dream's already gone. I was 24 when he said it to me for the last time. He said it at my kitchen table after I'd told him I wasn't going back to finish my architecture degree. After I'd explained that I was going to take the job at the surveying firm because it paid actual money and I was tired of being theoretical about my future. He didn't argue. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just looked at his hands for a long moment, and then he said that thing about dignity, and then he asked if I had any biscuits. He died the following spring. Quietly, quickly, in the way that some people leave, without giving you time to ask all the questions you should have been asking for years. After the funeral, I found his work boots in the back of his wardrobe. Steel-capped, black, the leather so worn in places it had gone almost silver. He bought them in 1987, the year before I was born. He was still wearing them the week he died. I put them in a box. I put the box under my bed. I haven't moved them since. I don't know why I'm telling you all of this except that it's necessary. I promise it's necessary. Back to Windsor. Back to the guard. He was stationed to the right of the main gate. Tall, proper tall, not just standing straight tall. The kind of height that looks uncomfortable in ordinary rooms. His uniform was immaculate in the way that military uniforms are always immaculate, which is to say that someone has put real work into making it look effortless. The bearskin sat perfectly. The tunic was without wrinkle. His gloves were white, and precise. But his boots, I noticed them before I noticed anything else about him, which is strange when you think about how much visual noise the rest of the uniform creates. But there was something about the boots that caught the early light differently to how you'd expect. A kind of depth to the shine. Not the flat mirror polish of something new. Something older. Something that had been tended to so many times that the leather itself had changed character. I stood there looking at them for what was probably too long. Declan nudged me. "You all right?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, just." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have the words for it yet. The guard didn't move. Didn't acknowledge me or anyone else. That's the whole point, of course. That's the discipline of it. The rigorous and complete discipline of standing absolutely still while the world moves around you and stares at you and takes photographs of you and occasionally says incredibly stupid things in your direction to see if they can get a reaction. I've watched tourists do it. The attempts range from mildly amusing to genuinely unkind, and the guards absorb every single one of them like stone absorbs rain. This guard was no different on the surface. Absolutely still. Eyes forward, rifle in position. But I was watching the boots. The morning got busier gradually, the way mornings at royal residences do. The family with the pigeon-obsessed children had now located the actual castle and were doing their best to appear interested. A tour group arrived, maybe 30 people, led by a woman with a bright yellow umbrella that she held up like a beacon even though it wasn't raining. The university students were taking careful notes. The older couple had progressed from the map to an actual guidebook and were having a quiet disagreement about something, the content of which I couldn't hear, but the tone of which was long married and mildly affectionate. I moved a little closer to the gate, not in a conspicuous way, or at least I hope not in a conspicuous way, just sort of drifting the way you do in a public space when something has caught your attention and you want a better look without committing to anything. From closer up, I could see the detail I'd half noticed from a distance. The boots weren't just old in the way that things get old without anyone paying attention. They were old in the way that things get old because someone has cared for them across a very long stretch of time. The leather had that quality that good old leather gets, a kind of warmth underneath the surface shine, something that newer leather, no matter how well polished, simply doesn't have. It takes years to develop. Specifically, it takes years of consistent care of someone sitting down regularly with cloth and wax and patience and going over every inch. These boots have been cared for a long time, and they weren't standard issue. I'm not an expert on military dress uniforms, but I know enough to know when something has a different origin to the rest of an outfit. The cut was slightly different. The toe shape. Small things, but these boots belonged to someone else before they belonged to him. I want to tell you about the moment the whole thing shifted. The moment it went from me quietly observing a detail that most people wouldn't notice to me witnessing something I've thought about almost every week since. It happened around 8:30. The tour group had gathered close to the gate. The woman with the yellow umbrella narrating in a clear, confident voice about the castle's history and the tradition of the guard and the particular regiment currently on duty. The guard I'd been watching, I started thinking of him as the tall one, for obvious reasons, remained still throughout. The tour group photographed him. Several of them photographed themselves beside him. He was, for them, part of the architecture. Then, one man separated from the tour group. He was maybe 60, silver-haired, well-dressed in the way that some people from continental Europe dress when they visit England. Very pressed, very intentional, slightly formal by British casual standards. He walked forward until he was very close to the guard. Too close, really. The kind of close that makes other people nearby subtly shift position out of a vague sense that something might be about to happen. He wasn't being aggressive. He wasn't trying to provoke anything. I want to be clear about that, because the story that's coming isn't that story. He seemed genuinely curious. He leaned forward slightly and looked down. He was looking at the boots. He looked for a long moment. Then he straightened up and said something in what I think was German, quietly, to the woman beside him, his wife, I assumed. She looked down, too. They exchanged a few words. Then he turned to the guard and said in careful English, "These boots, they're very old. Are they, forgive me, are they yours?" From before. The guard, of course, did not respond. Cannot respond. That's the rule, and everyone in that courtyard knew it. But something happened. It was almost nothing. It was the kind of thing that if you blinked, you missed it. The guard's jaw moved. Just slightly. Not in the shape of words. He didn't say anything. Didn't even begin to. But in the way that a jaw moves when a person hears something that lands somewhere deep and true. When a question reaches a place that ordinary sounds don't reach. The German man saw it. I saw it. He nodded slowly, as if the guard had answered him. Then he stepped back. I thought so. The man said, mostly to himself. I thought so. The tour moved on. The family with the children moved on. The university students finished their notes and left. Declan reappeared at my elbow, asking if I wanted to look at the gift shop before the queue got long. I didn't go to the gift shop. I sat down on a low stone wall at a slight angle from the guard's position. Not directly in front, which felt intrusive, but somewhere I could still see him. And I drank the rest of my cold petrol station coffee, and I thought about my father's boots in a box under my bed. And then I thought about something my father told me once, near the end, that I'd written off at the time as tiredness talking. He said he didn't regret the factory. Not really. He said there was a version of regret that was honest and useful, and then there was a version that was just self-pity wearing a different coat, and he wasn't interested in the second version. The thing you gave up, he said, it doesn't disappear. It just becomes something else. It goes into your hands, into the work, into the showing up. I looked at the guard's boots again from across the courtyard, and for the first time in 11 years, I understood what my father was talking about. Declan came back from the gift shop with a fridge magnet, a tea towel, and the information that there was a very good cafe around the corner that did full English breakfasts and had a framed photograph of the Queen on the wall. He seemed genuinely pleased about all three of these things. I told him to give me another 20 minutes. He looked at where I was sitting. He looked at the guard across the courtyard. He looked back at me. You've been staring at that bloke for 40 minutes, he said. I'm not staring. What are you doing then? I thought about it. Watching. He made a face that meant he found this insufficiently different from staring, but wasn't going to argue about it. He sat down on a wall beside me, opened his Ziploc bag, and began eating what I think was a rice cake covered in peanut butter. He didn't say anything else. That's the best thing about Declan. He can do silence when he decides to, and he decided to then. So we both sat there in the pale March morning, watching. I want to tell you what I'd worked out by that point, and then I want to tell you about what happened just after 10 o'clock, because those two things are connected in a way that I'm still trying to fully understand. Here's what I'd worked out. The guard, the tall one, let's keep calling him that since I never got his name, and I'm not going to invent one. He was young. I could see it in the parts of his face visible below the bearskin. Late 20s, possibly early 30s. Young enough that you noticed it. Young enough that the stillness he was maintaining felt like something recently learned and carefully practiced rather than something that had simply become second nature over a long career. You could tell the difference if you watched long enough. With a very experienced guard, the stillness is almost total. There's a settled quality to it, like a rock in a river. With someone still getting there, the stillness is real and disciplined, but there are micro-adjustments, tiny shifts of weight that the protocol allows. The occasional, barely perceptible blink that comes a fraction too consciously. I'm not criticizing. What these men and women do is extraordinary. I'm just saying you could tell he was somewhere in the middle of his training and not at the end of it. But the boots were not young. I'd had more time to look at them by now, and the more I looked, the more certain I became. The leather had a patina that takes years, real years, not months, to develop. The soles had been resoled at least once. You could see it at the edges if the light caught them right. And the upper part of the boot, around the ankle, had to wear a pattern that was unique to whoever had been walking in them. A very specific way the leather had shaped and curved and yielded. That wear pattern was not his. His height and stride would have created a different pressure map. Someone shorter had broken these boots in. Someone who walked differently. These boots had a whole life in them before they came to him. And he was caring for them. That was the thing that kept getting me. He was caring for them the way you care for something you've decided matters. Not just maintaining them, but honoring them. Whoever had given him these boots He hadn't just put them on. He'd taken up the responsibility of them. I know I'm reading a lot into footwear. I know that's what it looks like. But sometimes a thing is exactly as significant as it feels. And this felt significant. Just before 9, the guard changed. The changing of the guard at Windsor is different to London. Less theatrical in some ways, more intimate. The replacement guard came from the direction of the barracks with a small procession, and there was a brief handover that happened with the precise choreography of long repetition. Commands given, positions exchanged, the old guard moving away, the new guard taking position. I thought the tall one was going to be relieved. He wasn't. He was part of the incoming rotation, moving to a different position, slightly further along the wall. Still visible from where I was sitting. Still on duty. The changeover drew a fresh wave of attention from the visitors who'd arrived while it was happening, and for a few minutes the whole courtyard was alive with camera sounds and murmured observations and the general pleased energy of people who felt they'd arrived at exactly the right moment. Then it settled again. The tall one was now stationed maybe 15 meters from where he'd been. Same posture, same absolute stillness. The boots catching the morning light at a slightly different angle now. Declan had finished his rice cake and was looking at his itinerary again. "We should probably head to the cafe soon," he said. "Then, I want to get to Frogmore before noon." "Sure," I said. I didn't move. At 9:40, something happened that had nothing to do with any guard and everything to do with the kind of ordinary human chaos that big public spaces generate without warning. A woman, I'd say mid-40s, dark coat, sensible shoes, the overall impression of someone who organizes things professionally and is very good at it, came around the corner towards the gate entrance at a pace that was just slightly too fast for the conditions. The conditions being uneven stone, a slight slope, and the fact that the overnight dew had left the surface with a film of wet that the morning sun hadn't fully dealt with yet. She went down. Not dramatically. Not the kind of fall that makes everyone around freeze in horror. More the sudden, undignified, completely human kind of fall that happens in a split second and leaves a person sitting on the ground looking slightly stunned before their brain has quite caught up with their body. Her bag went one way. Her phone skidded across the stone. She put her hand out and caught herself, which is the instinct, except it meant she landed with real impact on her palm and knee. The people nearest to her, 3 of them, immediately moved to help. Someone picked up the phone. Someone retrieved the bag. The woman was already saying she was fine in the particular English way that means I am mortified and would like to disappear. One of the university students crouched down to ask if she needed anything. None of this was dramatic. None of it required official intervention. But I was watching the tall one. Because here's what protocol says about this exact situation. A guard on ceremonial duty at a royal residence does not break position for civilian incidents that are being adequately managed by bystanders. It's not coldness, it's structure. The role has specific parameters, and civilian first aid is not within them unless the situation is genuinely serious. The tall one knew this. He knew exactly what the protocol said. You could see it in every line of his body, the absolute rigorous knowledge of exactly what he was and was not permitted to do. And yet, his eyes moved, just for a second, maybe 2 seconds. His eyes moved from their fixed forward position to the woman on the ground, and something crossed his face. I was close enough to see it now, something that was not quite worry, but was adjacent to it. Something human and involuntary that broke through the surface of all that trained stillness for just a moment. She was all right. She was being helped up. Her knee was going to be bruised, and her dignity was going to need a few minutes, but she was fine. The people around her were kind and efficient, and it was handled. The tall one's eyes returned to their forward position. Nobody else noticed. Everyone else was looking at the woman or at each other. I was the only one looking at him, and I felt something I wasn't entirely prepared for. A kind of ache, I suppose. The very specific ache of watching someone contain something. Of watching someone exercise a discipline that costs something real. Not because they don't feel, you could see that he felt, but because the role demands that feeling be expressed only in the ways the role permits. And sometimes the role permits very little. The woman was on her feet now, brushing herself off, accepting the return of her bag with a smile that was slightly too bright in the way that post-embarrassment smiles always are. She glanced towards the guard position, possibly without even consciously meaning to. The reflex of checking whether your humiliation was witnessed by someone important. The guard's eyes were forward, fixed, unmoving. She looked away. I got up and walked to where Declan was standing. "Okay," I said. "Café." He looked relieved. We started walking, but I stopped after about 10 steps and looked back. The tall one was still at his position. Still, absolute. The boots catching the light. "Declan," I said, "do you remember Dad's boots? The ones from the factory?" He looked at me oddly. We don't talk about Dad that often, not in a casual conversational way. It's not that we avoid it. It's more that the loss sits in a particular place that requires a particular kind of intention to access. "Yeah," he said carefully. "The black ones. Stuck up. They're in a box under my bed." "I know. You know. Mom told me. Years ago." He looked at me for a moment. "Why are you thinking about that?" I didn't have a good answer. I gestured, vaguely, back towards the gate. "Something about those boots," I said. Declan looked at the guard. He looked at the boots. He's not an unobservant person. He's actually quite perceptive when he's not distracted by itineraries and rice cakes. He looked for a few seconds with actual attention. "They're not his, are they?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "No," I said. "I don't think so." We stood there for a moment. "Dad would have liked that," Declan said finally. "Someone taking something old and looking after it properly." He said it simply with no performance, and it landed the way simple, true things land, quietly and with full weight. "Yeah," I said. "He would have." We went to the cafe. We had breakfast. The framed photograph of the Queen was indeed on the wall, between a clock and a list of the day's specials. The full English was exactly what a full English at a small cafe near a royal residence in March should be. Competent, substantial, slightly more expensive than it needed to be. Declan consulted his itinerary. I drank proper coffee this time and looked out the window at the street. I kept thinking about what the German man had said. "These boots, are they yours? From before?" And the way the guard's jaw had moved. The way the man had nodded and said, "I thought so," as if something confirmed itself. There are questions that don't require answers. Or more accurately, there are questions that answer themselves through the asking. And this was one of them. The boots said everything. The condition of the boots, the care in them, the way they'd been carried from whoever's life they started in into this young man's ceremonial uniform. All of that said something that no spoken answer could have improved upon. Someone gave him those boots. Someone gave him boots that had walked a different life. A longer life. A life that had maybe started with one set of dreams and ended somewhere the dreamer hadn't originally planned to go. And he put them on, and he polished them, and he put them on his feet and walked out onto the stones of Windsor Castle and stood in front of the whole watching world, and he carried them. I need to stop here and tell you something that I'm a little uncertain about sharing because it's personal in a way that makes me feel slightly exposed. But it's the center of this whole thing, so I'm going to say it. I have spent 11 years feeling guilty about those boots under my bed. Not in a constant, front-of-mind way, more in a background way, a slow, low-grade guilt that surfaces unexpectedly. When I drive past a bootmender's, when I see work boots in a shop window, when someone mentions my father's name in the context of his work, the guilt is about this. I put them in a box, and I left them there because I couldn't figure out what to do with them. I couldn't throw them away. That felt like a betrayal I wasn't capable of committing. I couldn't display them. That felt like turning grief into decoration. I couldn't wear them. Different size, different purpose, steel-capped work boots have no place in my actual life. So I put them in a box, and I left them there, and I told myself I'd figure it out eventually. What I'd really done, without admitting it to myself, was turn them into a monument to my failure to decide. Every time I slid something under that bed and caught sight of the box, I felt it. The incompleteness, the deferral, the fact that I hadn't done right by something that deserved better. The guard with the old boots had done right by them. He hadn't framed them. He hadn't put them in a box. He hadn't deferred the decision about what they meant or what to do with them. He'd found them, or they'd been given to him, and He'd made a choice. I will carry these. I will maintain them. I will walk in them. And every morning that he came to duty and bent down and laced them up, he was making that choice again. I thought about this the whole drive back to Coventry. I thought about it for weeks. 6 weeks after Windsor, I went back. I didn't plan it that way. Or rather, I planned it in the indirect way that you plan things you haven't quite admitted to yourself yet. I agreed to attend a conference in Reading, which is 40 minutes from Windsor by train, and I gave myself a free morning before the conference started, and I took the train, and I walked from the station to the castle, and I stood in the same place I'd stood in March. I told myself I was just in the area. The morning was different this time, early May, so the light had more warmth to it, that particular English spring light that feels like a gift after months of gray. The tourists were more numerous. School holidays starting, I think. Children in matching high-visibility vests who had clearly been bussed in from somewhere and were receiving information about the castle from a teacher at full professional volume. A lot more languages in the air. The whole place felt busier and louder and more alive than it had in March. I found a position near the gate. Looked at the guards. I didn't expect him to be there. I genuinely didn't. The rosters are complex. The regiments rotate. There was no logical reason to think the same guard would be in the same place 6 weeks later. He was there. I can't explain the feeling of that. A sort of full-body recognition. The height, the posture, the absolute stillness that I now knew had a person inside it who could notice things, who noticed a woman fall, who felt something when a stranger asked a perceptive question about his boots. And the boots themselves, shining in the May morning light with that same deep, warm quality. Cared for again, still carrying whatever they carried. I stood there for a while, and this time I didn't need to stay as long to feel what I'd come to feel. It was quicker now, because I already knew what I was looking at. Or rather, I knew what I was looking for. I was looking for the answer to a question that my father had asked me without asking, the question that was in everything he ever said about work and dignity and dreams deferred, and that I'd never actually answered properly because I'd never properly understood it. The question is, what do you do with something you've been given that's bigger than you? My father's career dreams, the engineering, the university place, the path not taken. Those were bigger than the reality he ended up living. Not bigger in importance, not bigger in value. Bigger in the sense of being too large to be fully resolved. A thing that couldn't be finished or fixed or put away cleanly. He'd spent 22 years at that factory, and he'd found a way to carry it, the unlived version of his life, with him inside the work he actually did. He'd found the dignity in it, not instead of the grief. Alongside the grief, the boots under my bed were his unlived life. The thing he kept going back to, steel-toed and worn silver and worked in. The evidence of what he'd made of the path he actually walked. And I put them in a box, because I couldn't figure out what to do with something I'd been given that was bigger than me. The guard across the courtyard had figured it out. He was wearing it. I want to tell you about the 10 o'clock incident, because it's the centerpiece of this whole story, and I've been building towards it since the beginning. I was still standing near the gate at 10 past 10. The school group had been organized into a rough line and was being addressed near the entrance. Regular visitors were doing what regular visitors do. Photographing, consulting maps, watching the guards with varying degrees of actual attention. The May morning was warm enough now that jackets were being reconsidered. A young couple, late teens, early 20s, were standing very close to the guard's position. Closer than was really appropriate. Not because they were being deliberately provocative, but because they were absorbed in each other in the way that very new couples are absorbed in each other, which is to say, almost totally. They were looking at the castle wall, then at each other, then at their phones, then at each other again. The guard was, for them, furniture. The girl, I'll say girl because she looked very young, maybe 18, was leaning against the stone wall, just to the guard's left, phone in hand, taking a photograph that I think was meant to include him in the background. Perfectly normal tourist behavior. Harmless. What happened next was not her fault, and I want to be clear about that from the start. She shifted her position slightly to get a better angle, and her foot came down on something, a loose piece of stone or a slightly raised edge. I couldn't quite tell from where I was. It was the same unpredictable catch of the foot that had brought down the woman in March, the kind of thing that happens in old places with old stones that have been walked on for centuries and are subtly uneven in ways that your feet don't always read in time. She stumbled, more dramatically than the March woman. She lurched forward and sideways and would have gone down completely except that her boyfriend caught her arm. He caught it and pulled, and she righted herself, but in the righting she swung into his body, and they both staggered one step to the left, which was one step toward the guard's position. They didn't fall. Nobody touched the guard. Nobody was in danger. But for 1 second, maybe less, maybe a fraction of 1 second, the staggering couple came within about an arm's length of him. And in that fraction of a second, the guard did something. He moved, not dramatically, not with alarm, barely perceptibly, in a way that if you weren't watching with real attention, you might have processed only as a slight adjustment of position. But I was watching with real attention, and I can tell you exactly what he did. He turned his body very slightly, perhaps 20 degrees, towards them, and he lowered the angle of his rifle by perhaps 5 degrees, and he planted his feet with a different kind of weight. All in the same instant. It was a stance, a protective one. Not aggressive, not alarmed, but readied. The specific physical language of someone who has been trained to be a barrier between a thing that needs protecting and whatever the world might send at it on any given morning. The couple regained themselves, laughed, a little breathless. The boyfriend said something to the girl, and she said something back, and they both looked briefly at the guard, perhaps realizing for the first time that morning that he was actually a person, actually there, actually present. The guard returned to his former position. The tiny adjustment of body and rifle and stance reversed. Everything as it was. But one more thing happened. The girl looked directly at him. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you just realized they were paying attention when you thought no one was. There was something in her face, surprise, recognition, a slight color in her cheeks that wasn't embarrassment exactly, but was in the same neighborhood. She said quietly and sincerely, "Thank you." She didn't expect a response. She knew the protocol. She said it anyway. And he, the tall one, who had not moved for the better part of 2 hours, who had absorbed photographs and tourist comments and the whole indifferent traffic of the morning without a flicker, he did it again. The jaw, that same involuntary movement. Just the jaw, just the smallest acknowledgement of a word received. The girl saw it. She smiled. A real smile, not a tourist smile. She said something to her boyfriend. I couldn't hear what. And they moved away. The guard stood still. His boots stood in the May light. I left Windsor at 11. Caught my train to Reading. Sat in a window seat and watched the English countryside do what English countryside does in May, which is be so relentlessly, insistently beautiful that it almost feels like an argument. I called my mother from the platform. Not about any of this. I wasn't ready to talk about any of this, not out loud. Not yet. She asked how the conference was going, and I said it hadn't started yet, and she said to remember to eat properly, and I said I would. We talked for a few minutes about ordinary things. She mentioned Declan's itinerary progress. She mentioned the garden. She didn't mention the boots. She never mentions the boots. I think she believes I'll get there eventually. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand and thought about the girl saying thank you and the guard's jaw moving. About the way he'd shifted his stance in that fraction of a second. Trained response, yes, but also something chosen. The training goes in and it becomes the response, but the person who decides to be trained, who shows up every morning and maintains the discipline and carries the old boots and does the whole thing again and again, that's a choice. That keeps being a choice. I thought about my father, who made the same choice differently, who went to the factory every day, who never said he resented it because he'd found something inside the going to the factory that was bigger than resentment. The dignity of showing up, the integrity of doing the work fully even when the work wasn't a dream. The dream goes somewhere. That's the thing. When a dream doesn't come true in the shape you expected, it doesn't disappear. It becomes something else. It goes into the work you actually do, the way my father always said. It goes into your hands, into the boots. I got home from Reading 2 days later. It was a Sunday. The flat was quiet. I went to my bedroom. I got down on my knees beside the bed. I pulled out the box. I opened it. The boots were exactly as I'd left them. Black leather gone silver at the stress points. Steel toe caps with their particular dull shine. The wear pattern along the sole that was uniquely his. The way he transferred his weight. The way he walked, encoded in the leather over 22 years. I sat on the floor with them for a while. Then I got up, got a cloth, got the tin of leather conditioner that I'd bought approximately 4 years ago and never used for anything. I sat down again. I opened the tin. I started working the conditioner into the leather. I'm not handy with this. I don't have his patience or his knowledge. I went too fast in some places and too slow in others, and my technique was probably terrible by any objective measure. But I did it carefully, and I did it with attention, and by the time I finished, and the leather had that slightly different quality to it, darker, more supple, less gray at the edges. Something had shifted in my chest that I don't have a better word for than relief. Relief is what it was. The particular relief of a deferred decision finally made. I'm not going to wear them. We're different sizes, and even if we weren't, they belong to a version of a working life that isn't mine to appropriate. But I'm not going to put them back in a box either. They're on the shelf in my study now, not displayed in a grand way, not framed, not lit, not turned into a memorial. Just there, on the shelf, like they belong there, which they do, in the same way that an old thing that has been properly cared for always belongs wherever it ends up when someone finally decides to care for it. I condition the leather every month. I check on them. I do what needs doing. It's a small thing. Maybe it looks like nothing from the outside. But every time I do it, I think about my father's hands, about the factory and the dream packed away and the choice made and made again every morning to show up fully and do the work with everything you have. And I think about a young guard at Windsor Castle, standing in the May morning light, wearing a pair of boots that began their life somewhere else, in someone else's story, and choosing to honor that, choosing to carry it. There's a question I've had since Windsor, and I'll never get an answer to it. I'll never know whose boots they were. I'll never know the story that happened before him, whose feet walked them in, whose hands polished them in some earlier year, in some earlier life. I'll never know what was given up or not given up, what was dreamed or not dreamed, by the person who wore them before. But I know the boots themselves. I know what they look like, how the leather has developed its particular depth, where the sole has been replaced, and where the upper has shaped itself around a different gait. I know the care that's in them, and I know what the guard looks like carrying them. That absolute stillness with a person inside it. The eyes that move when a woman falls. The jaw that moves when a stranger asks a true question. The tiny, readied shift of a body that has been trained to be a wall between ordinary life and whatever threatens it, even for a fraction of a second in a courtyard on a warm morning in May. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know I've been watching. He doesn't know that something about his boots on 2 different mornings shifted something in a person sitting on a wall with a bad cup of coffee and a guilt he'd been carrying for 11 years. He's just doing his job. But that's the whole point, isn't it? He's just doing his job with full attention, with full care, with boots that contain a whole other life in their leather. And he shows up, and he stands still, and he feels what he feels in the limited ways his role permits him to feel it. And he goes home, and he polishes them, and he comes back the next morning. His boots are older than his career dreams ever were, maybe. Or maybe the boots belong to someone whose dreams age differently. I don't know. What I know is that something old can be carried into something new without losing what it was. What I know is that showing up is a form of love, and discipline is a form of grief resolved, and the work you do with your whole attention is where the unlived things go when they don't die. They go into your hands, into the leather, into the standing still on cold stones while the world photographs you and moves on. My father knew this. The guard knows this in a different way, in the language of a different life. And me, I know it now, too. Finally, just finally, I drove to Coventry last Sunday to visit my mother. We had lunch. She showed me the garden, the bulbs coming through, the early roses, a clematis she's been nursing along a trellis for 3 years that has finally decided to cooperate. Before I left, I told her about the boots. What I'd done, where they are now. She went very quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a woman hearing something she's been waiting to hear for 11 years. Then, she said, he'd have liked that. He always said things should be used or cared for, not just kept. I know, I said. He would have liked you to care for them. I know. She walked me to the car. We hugged. She didn't make a thing of it, and neither did I, because we're both the kind of people who prefer to let important moments land without ceremony. But she held on a moment longer than usual, and I held on too. I don't know if I'll go back to Windsor again. Maybe. Probably, actually, if I'm honest. Declan's got 3 more royal residences on his list, and he'll want a driver eventually. If I do go back, I'll look for him. The tall one. I'll look for the boots. I'll probably find someone else entirely. Different guard, different morning, different story happening in the courtyard that I know nothing about. But if I see him, if he's there, still standing, still, the old boots catching the light, I think I'll feel something like gratitude for the thing he did without knowing he did it. For the way a stranger's boots can reach across a courtyard and across 11 years and touch something that's been waiting to be touched. I won't say anything. He wouldn't hear it if I did, but I'll think it. Thank you. Some things outlast the dreams that first imagined them. Some things carry more than one life in their leather. That's not a tragedy. That's just what it means to be a thing that's been loved.